Hello everyone, welcome to another video about game collecting, and I want to look today at PlayStation 3 exclusives. What exactly are exclusives? I need to define that very clearly. I'm trying to keep the category as tight as possible because otherwise, believe me, the floodgates open. I've looked through so many lists online, my brain is swirling, and unfortunately there is not one list that I would say is 100% complete and correct. However, there are at least two very good lists that I rely on mainly, and as usual that information will be available in the description below with links so you can follow up and do your own research, which I encourage you to do if you want to get into collecting or are already collecting. PS3 exclusives are for me the games that were published only on that platform, usually by Sony, made available either in physical or digital format. As collectors, we usually look at the physical edition. That is the primary unit for us. So I favour the games that had a physical disc-only release. Many games were, of course, simultaneously released digitally on the PSN store in the various regions, because the PS3 truly began that era of online digital download provision. But it was an in-between kind of period, and there was still a fair number of games that were, for whatever reason, I don't know, were not made available digitally and only came in physical disc format. Now, to my mind, as a collector, those should be prime targets for collecting, because there is no other way you can play the game. So I tend to favour those. You might think that means automatically that they should be far more valuable than those that have been released digitally as well. That is actually not necessarily true. All sorts of factors play into this. I would say the main one would be how many copies were printed. If the market is flooded with copies of a particular game, even if it's physical only, it will never achieve a particularly high price. So I'll start going through my own collection, showing you what I've got, and we can discuss some of the issues around individual titles. We won't get through even a fraction today. I will have to do it in several videos, obviously, because there's quite a lot of interesting stuff really with the PlayStation 3. Did you know there's a book about the PlayStation 3 coming out? Sandeep is writing it. You may remember his Vita book, which I have covered here on the channel. So It Only Did Everything will be ready in June next year, and I'm really excited for it. He's going to cover the history of the PlayStation as well as a lot of games, as you can see from these images. It's looking good already, don't you think? Covering series retrospectives. Infamous, I'll be talking about that game. And Heavy Rain, yes, I'm looking at that as well. Check the description for details, please. I'll start off with a game that fairly recently received a lot more attention than it ever got at release or, during the early years. and that is 3D Dot Game Heroes. I think you could rightly call it a small niche title. Published by Atlas, and as usual I have a few notes occasionally for some of the games where it's interesting. So as you can see, this is the US edition. Now 3D Dot Heroes, 3D Dot Game Heroes, a bit of an awkward title, I just call it 3D Dot. It was developed by Silicon Studio, and the game is using voxel-based graphics in a 3D environment to emulate the 2D graphics of earlier video games. It's very much a bit of a nostalgic throwback to the older classic games, what we now call retro games. It was published in Japan by From Software in 2009 and in the West by Atlas in 2010. It is generally considered or referred to as a Zelda-inspired game. I have noticed recently that with the sudden price spikes that happened last year when Sony announced they were going to close the PS Vita and PS3 stores, and panic broke out, and you could see the prices every day literally for these platforms for the games just going up and up and up. And because this game is in relatively short supply, there was suddenly a focus on it, that previously just wasn't there. And people looked at it and said, oh gosh, is this any good? This is a hidden gem. And a lot of people declared it to be a real hidden gem, a must-have, a must-play. Well, let's have a look at the pricing first. I've got my little notes here. As I've mentioned before in a previous video, I use price charting for a general baseline level price as an indication. So there is a PAL version of the game. I've never seen one, strangely enough, and that is valued higher at around $46 US, whereas the North American version is valued at around 38. Obviously, prices out on the sales platforms like eBay, etc., will most likely be higher than that. So if you find yourself in the situation that you could get a copy, but it would cost you a fair penny, like, over 60, 70 US, and you're wondering whether it's worth it, I would say only if you are into really, really deeply into this type of top-down dungeon Zelda-inspired game with, let's face it, pretty simple graphics. I'm myself personally not a big fan of voxel graphics at all, so it doesn't do much for me. I'm glad I've got it in my collection because it's now considered a bit of an unusual, a quirky game. But if I had to make a choice, did I really, really want to play this game and therefore had to have it, I'd probably say I might look at another game that might be of more interest to me. Yeah, I wouldn't classify it as a, super interesting hidden gem. Personally, I wouldn't, but, that's just my opinion. So I'll show you just a bit of 3D Dot Game Heroes. You can choose your adventurer. You see straight away the humour in the descriptions. I'm going with the prince, a straightforward choice. Then we get the usual kind of introduction, dark king, evil monsters, young man with a sacred sword, etc. You know the drill. And then we get hard to read text on background, but people weren't happy with the kingdom anymore, and King Tesro launched an inquiry and boldly declared, "This is the age of 3D." And this is kind of cute. And suddenly we are in full 3D with voxel graphics. Oh no, dark orb, stolen. Well, we know the drill. And here we are at the inn, wakey wakey sleepyhead, as all good RPGs start, don't they? Strange dream? Yes. You see, you have to dream in 3D. And off we are to see the king. And like all kings, he wants something. Obviously, you need to pull the sacred sword from the stone. That's a time-honoured tradition. And naturally, I agree straight away. The sword and shield, and off we go. But before we go, we talk to a few people in the basement of the castle who give you very good advice. It is indeed very outrageous to get a game over. Can save anytime, anywhere? No, that is an exaggeration. Saving in a temple puts you at its entrance upon resuming. Saving outside a temple, I can only say if you're very lucky. I have had odd things happening with my saves, and I've had to redo whole segments of gameplay over and over because of the silly saving rule. It's one reason why I probably never got that far in the game. You found the sign, you're good. You can see the humour of the game. It's all in this sort of cheeky commentary and dialogue. And it is entertaining, up to a point. After a few hours, I sort of felt like I might have had enough and just wanted to get on with it. Now, those tree trunks are actually quite nasty. So we're going through the forest now to try and find the sword, and here is the first boss battle. It's a 2-boss battle, and these guys are weird. They jump about, make a horrific noise, and I'm pretty sure I was squashed by them at least once and had to restart. You also see how the sword is kind of... You can only go 90 degrees. You cannot go diagonally. So you have to have very good aim and direction with the sword. I'm down to nearly 1 heart, so this is not looking promising, but a hero never gives up. And I had a bit of luck, and it just hit him spot on. So I thought, well, please, a second bit of luck. And there we are. The good thing is that you can replenish hearts very easily and quickly, just by killing ordinary enemies. Is that a question mark? That is a rhetorical question. Of course we pull it out. So Ancient Sword is ours. We are officially the hero. And there is a little sidekick appearing. Okay, so that's what we do. Back to the palace. As I said, quickly slaughter some rabbits or whatever. And you do have a lot of mowing of greenery and slaying of rabbits to do to get any kind of coinage in this game. It's very parsimonious, the game. And here you can, I think, replenish your HP. And wouldn't you know it, I do one good deed and they expect another one straight away. So 6 orbs, 6 temples. Okay, we know the drill. And that's the menu screen. This is the village where we can, you know, do the usual shopping and stuff. Humour, I told you. And here we can enhance our equipment, which means lengthening your sword. The sword can actually get very awkward in tight spaces, so having it wider and longer is not always such a good idea. I'd rather have it stronger, but don't have the money for that. The item management is slightly odd. I found it just a bit awkward and confusing. Now the dash boots are obviously a good enhancement, so yeah, do get them. And now this is actually quite a funny scene. He's got to choose a bride. So we're going with a childhood friend. And I was expecting a wonderful wedding gift, and all I got is some measly coins. 1G, awesome. Yeah, right. Now here's a bit of automatic demo play that you get whenever you start up the game, and it shows you a bit of the action you can get. You notice that switch? You truly have keen eyes. Yes, that opened the door. Wasn't that clever of me? So this is the grass temple, and I'll just quickly show you some of the gameplay inside, because that's pretty much what it's like, whether you're at the early stages or later. The basic gameplay is pretty unvarying. So naturally you always need keys in these dungeons, and then you gotta, you know, toddle off and find the key, and you know the drill. I know the drill. Yes, if we only had a bow and arrow. So there's the key. And here we have a bat-infested room. So you can move blocks, as you would expect with blocks that look like Lego blocks. You just got to find the one that is different. You can sort of test them, but you can see from the top which ones should be movable. And there we are. And we get another key. You always need keys. Can't have too many. The dash maneuver needs a bit of practice. It is a bit unusual. Temple map. So here it is, and that is absolutely essential for orientation. So yes, the enemies respawn, which is of course useful if you want more coins and hearts. Not so useful if you want to just quickly scoot through. Now Lee says they have magic beams and I must use amazing evasion skills. Well, my evasion skills aren't that great. If in doubt, I tend to resort to brute force. And I just go in and before they get a chance, I clobber them. I find that works quite well. Indeed, if there's a switch, do press it. And there we are, door open. The problem is you have to always awkwardly reposition yourself because of the sword to be able to hit an enemy. So I hope this brief look at a 3D dot has given you a bit of an impression to help you decide whether it is a game to your liking or not. 10G. This game is stingy. So that's 3D dot game Heroes. If you can get it at a reasonable price, it's probably a pretty solid investment, I would say. So next one up is our tonelico Qoga, and this is the third and final game in the tonelico series. The first two are on the PS2. This one was a bit controversial because it changed the gameplay in particular, and there are some camera issues and issues with the combat. The tonelico series is very much organised around music. It is known for its somewhat unusual system of harmonics. There are artificial beings called revertes who can project a song power which is used in battle. If you're at all interested in JRPGs, in particular from the R series, so not not only tonelico but also the games that came after this one, and that's Ciel no Surge and no Surge, which was published on the PS3 in the West, and is probably my favourite game so far from the series, but I haven't played the PS2 games yet. Now I want to make just a few quick comments about this game which may help you decide whether it's something you want to get or not. The first thing is the graphics. They are, like almost everything in the game, quite divided. Where there's a good thing, there is a bad thing. I like the character portraits and models. They are nicely done, well detailed. But the backgrounds, oh dear oh me, the backgrounds are pretty dreadful and they don't get any better. Here's an example of that song power and the battle. As you can see, it's a free-flowing, real-time battle system, and unfortunately not a terribly good one. It's almost like a mini-game because you have to build up the burst meter for the song harmonics to be able to execute any kind of special attack. This here is a direct attack. The reverté is executing on the enemy. You can do that as well.
I'm coming! Oh, that's fabulous!
There's an awful lot of running around, but at least the meter in the bottom right-hand corner tells you when you've defeated all the enemies in an area and can explore. The story is actually quite engaging. I suppose you could say it's a reasonably generic type of JRPG story, but I certainly found it interesting and wanted to keep going. The characters too are not without some interest and charm. Unfortunately, the male protagonist, Aoto, is a bit of a one-sided teenage boy, quite opinionated. But of course, a big part of the story is the growing up factor. He is still very young. That is the next thing I want to talk about, the very important gameplay mechanic of the Cosmosphere, and that is where the visual novel aspect of this game comes in. It really is a hybrid type of a JRPG with strong visual novel elements, I would say. So this is the all-important Cosmosphere, where the male protagonist, Aoto, dives into the mind sphere of the reverté. Revertés are always female, and he has to learn more about them, discover their different personae, and as he deepens his understanding of her, she will level up, literally, and become stronger with her song magic. So you can say that this is an interesting idea. Unfortunately, it is also linked to the battle system, during which the reverté, as she increases her song magic, also sheds her clothing. It's called purging. And this is an aspect of the game that some reviewers and players found not to their taste. I hasten to add that there is no actual nudity on display. Well, I haven't seen any so far, so it's probably more in the mind. Just the idea of linking the stripping of the soul with the stripping of the clothes is perhaps a bit heavy-handed. In a way, I would say it actually dates the game. Really classic games don't really need such gimmicks, I think. There are additionally also lots of talks that you can have with the revertés, and it's important that you seek out those talk scenes, once again for having access to a variety of bonuses and skill levels, talking about their everyday anxieties and little problems. The issue, I think, that potentially could be much more offensive is one concerning gender issues. This is a point where we have moved on a lot and are a lot more sensitive, whereas especially in the older Japanese games we find that sensitivity often lacking, and we have a particular character here in this game who is presented as a hugely muscled figure who is actually a tiny girl in her true form, but in her battle form she looks like a hulking masculine brute, really. There are some rather insensitive comments from protagonist Aoto, which nowadays I think won't go down quite so well. So it's a question whether you can, bypass that in your gameplay. But if that is something that seriously disturbs you, then you might want to consider whether it's, an appropriate game for you. By the way, I talked about the backgrounds earlier, but here you can see that the city environment is actually really nicely done. It is quite vibrant and it's enjoyable exploring it. So I'll leave you with these images. I've talked enough. Any further questions, I'm happy to answer. Nipponichi Software, a JRPG. I don't think it's difficult to get hold of these days, nor is it particularly expensive. If you're into JRPGs, I think there's a good place for it in your collection. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, practically all the Atelier games are available on various platforms. The PlayStation ones were usually after some time ported to the Vita as the Plus version, and in recent years we've had them come to the Switch, so they're well covered in terms of platforms these days. But there is, interestingly, one game, the very first one that came to the PlayStation 3, and that is the original Atelier Rorona. Just the straight-up original vanilla version. And that is, as far as I'm aware, this version, still exclusive to the PS3. Also available digitally on PSN, but not on any other platform. I also have the Plus version for the PS3. Most people would have bought the Plus version for the Vita, or later the DX version. Now, the various Disgaea games are usually available on other platforms as well, like the Vita, for example. But there is one that is PS3 only exclusive. And that's Disgaea D2, A Brighter Darkness. Now, this game is probably not as well known in the series as the other ones. It's a direct sequel to the original PlayStation 2 game, Disgaea Hour of Darkness. And while I wouldn't say that it brings anything particularly new to the table and is all round probably more of an average Disgaea game, I think would be fair to say, if you want Disgaea in your collection, then I think this is definitely a game you would want to include. So here's some brief edited footage from the game's opening.
The Netherworld, darker than a pitch-black cave, deeper than the depths of the seas, a land where ominous demons run rampant. In the past, this world was ruled by an overlord with unrivaled charisma named Krichevskoy.
No! It's probably because I haven't given these flowers enough affection.
Apparently the demons in the Netherworld haven't realized that I've become the Overlord yet. If I show them proof of my absolute power, they won't be able to help but admire my greatness.
I checked the voice actors for the cast, and they are exactly the same as always for the Disgaea franchise. In particular, the Japanese and English language voice actors for Lahal, the American one being Barbara Goodson, as always. However, for some reason the voices didn't quite gel with me. I switched over in Chapter 1 to the Japanese voices and found those a bit softer overall, just easier to live with. I think you can tell straight away from the opening that the story isn't exactly brimming with exciting stuff, and the dialogue doesn't quite have the witty, snappy quality of, for example, Disgaea 2 or Disgaea 4.
I've decided to have monuments celebrating.
It's our masterpiece, dude!
It looks enough like you. Don't be so picky, Prince.
But as you can see, the graphics look fine. They're clean and crisp. And the combat is as good as ever.